I bought my dream lake cottage for absolute peace. That peace lasted less than an hour before a devastating surprise turned my sanctuary into a desperate fight for survival. The scent of old pine and damp earth was the smell of freedom. For the first time in 25 years, I was utterly, blissfully alone. The cottage wasn't much, just a humble A-frame tucked away on a sliver of land, bordering a lake so clear you could see the stones on the bottom. But it was mine. I'd signed the papers that morning, my hand shaking with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Every penny I'd scraped together after the divorce, every extra shift I'd picked up, it was all for this, for the quiet, for the view of the sun setting over the water, turning it to liquid gold. I stood on the rickety wooden porch, a lukewarm beer in my hand, and just breathed. The air was different here, clean and sharp. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore and the whisper of the wind through the towering pines. Inside, the cottage was a testament to my new beginning, empty. There was a dusty sofa left by the previous owners, a small, ancient-looking fridge that hummed with effort, and a single mattress I'd thrown on the floor of the loft. My worldly possessions for the weekend were packed into a single cooler. A half-eaten block of cheddar, some sliced turkey, a loaf of bread, and the rest of this six-pack. Utensils? I had a spork I'd grabbed from a gas station. Plates? The paper bag the bread came in. I was roughing it, and I had never been happier. This was my sanctuary, a place where no one needed anything from me. No demanding boss, no PTA meetings, no schedule to keep. My son, Leo, was 21, a junior in college, and for the most part, self-sufficient. I had done my job. I had raised a good man. Now it was my turn to sit, to think, to simply be. I took a long sip of my beer, a triumphant smile spreading across my face. I'd done it. I had my own little piece of heaven. That's when my phone buzzed, a violent, angry sound that ripped through the perfect tranquility. I fumbled it out of my pocket, squinting at the screen. It was Leo. My smile widened. He was probably calling to congratulate me again, to ask how it felt. I'd sent him a dozen pictures already of the lake, the porch, the ridiculously small kitchen. "Hey, sweetie," I answered, my voice full of sunshine and pine needles. "You're not going to believe how beautiful it is. I'm looking at the lake right now, and I swear I can see the future." "Mom, awesome! That's so cool!" His voice was loud, tinny, and crackled with an energy that felt out of place in my peaceful world. There was music thumping in the background. "Listen, I have the most amazing news." "Oh, yeah?" I chuckled, leaning back against the porch railing. "What's that?" "So, you know how the guys and I were supposed to go camping this weekend, but it got rained out." "I remember. That was a shame," I said, my eyes tracing the path of a lone canoe gliding across the water. "Yeah, well, it's not a shame anymore. I found a solution, a much, much better solution." He sounded so proud of himself. "I told everyone about your new place, your awesome, super cool lake cottage." A small, cold knot began to form in my stomach. The canoe in the distance suddenly seemed very, very far away. You did you?" "Totally. They were so stoked. I mean, a real roof, a lake. It's perfect. It's going to be legendary. We're just packing up the cars now." The cold knot tightened into a ball of ice. I pushed myself off the railing, standing up straight. "Leo, what are you saying? What cars? Who is we?" "Oh, just the guys, you know, and their girlfriends, and a few people from Cassie's sorority. Nothing crazy." My mind was a frantic, sputtering calculator trying to compute the numbers. Leo, how many people exactly is nothing crazy? There was a pause, a muffled shout to someone in the background. Uh, I think like 20? Maybe 22? Don't worry, a few people might flake. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I stared into the empty cottage behind me, at the single mattress, at my cooler with its two sad-looking turkey sandwiches, at the one solitary roll of toilet paper sitting on the bathroom counter. My voice came out as a strangled whisper. 20 people? Leo, you can't be serious. Of course I'm serious. It's going to be the best weekend ever. You're the best mom ever for letting us do this, he chirped, completely oblivious to the frantic, hyperventilating noises I was making on my end of the line. Letting you? Leo, I don't have anything here. I have half a loaf of bread and a spork. There's one bed. There's not even a coffee maker. Oh, that's no problem. We're bringing tons of booze and chips. We'll be there in like an hour. So get ready. This is going to be epic. Gotta go. See you soon. Love you. And then he hung up. The line went dead. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone mix with the suddenly mocking sounds of the gentle breeze and the lapping water. 20 people. An hour. I slowly lowered the phone and my gaze fell upon my meager supplies, my little sanctuary, my peace, my quiet. It was all about to be invaded. I took a shaky breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. 20 college kids were about to descend on my completely empty, completely unprepared cottage in less than 60 minutes. I was standing on the precipice of a nightmare, and just then, through the trees, from the direction of the long gravel road that led to my property, I heard it, the unmistakable stomach-dropping sound of tires crunching on gravel, and then another set, and another. They weren't an hour away. They were already here. For a long moment, I didn't move. I was a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming convoy. The crunching grew louder, closer, resolving into the distinct sounds of multiple vehicles lumbering down the unpaved lane. My little slice of heaven, my quiet escape, had one single narrow dirt road leading to it. There was no one else it could be. A mud-splattered Jeep Cherokee rounded the final bend, followed by a dented Honda Civic with a speaker vibrating in the back window, and finally a massive pickup truck with at least 8 people crammed into the cab and bed. They weren't an hour away. They were here. My son had lied, or more likely, had been so caught up in his epic plan that time had become an abstract concept. The vehicle skidded to a halt in a cloud of dust on the small patch of grass I had envisioned as a future garden. Doors flew open and a tide of youth spilled out. They were a cacophony of bright sweatshirts, ripped jeans, and loud whooping laughter. Music, a bass-heavy track I didn't recognize, pulsed from the Civic, immediately at war with the peaceful sounds of the lake. Coolers were heaved from the truck bed, duffel bags were thrown onto the ground, and a guy with a backwards baseball cap was already cracking open a can of something that fizzed aggressively. And then I saw Leo. He vaulted out of the passenger seat of the Jeep, his face beaming, a conquering hero returning to his newly claimed land. "Mom, surprise, we made great time," he yelled, jogging towards me with his arms wide open. I was frozen on the porch, my half-finished beer still clutched in my hand. He enveloped me in a hug that smelled of cheap body spray and car upholstery. He pulled back, still grinning, completely failing to register the look of pure, unadulterated horror on my face. "Isn't this great?" he said, gesturing to the swarm of people descending upon my property. "Everyone, this is my mom, the legend herself." A few people yelled, "Hey, Mrs. Shh," or gave me a lazy wave before turning their attention back to unloading their gear. They started to stream past me, up the porch steps, and into my cottage, my empty, sacred cottage. I watched, numb, as a girl with pink hair dropped a wet sleeping bag onto the floor where I had planned to put a reading chair. Two guys immediately claimed the dusty sofa, arguing over who got which cushion. Someone else was already in the kitchen, yanking open the fridge door to find it cavernously empty, save for my sad block of cheese. "Leo," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I grabbed his arm, my nails digging into the sleeve of his sweatshirt, and pulled him towards the corner of the porch, away from the main flow of traffic. "What have you done?" He finally seemed to notice my expression. His smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion. "What do you mean? I told you we were coming. It's a party. It's going to be awesome." "You told me an hour, and you told me nothing crazy. Leo, this is a full-blown invasion. Look at this place." I gestured wildly at the interior, where a portable speaker was now being set up on my windowsill. "There is nothing here. I have no food, no plates, no cups. I have one bathroom, one, for over 20 people. Mom, relax." He laughed, a dismissive, frustrating sound. "We brought stuff. We've got like 10 cases of beer, a giant bottle of vodka, and enough chips to feed an army. We're good." My head was spinning. He wasn't getting it. He was seeing this through the invincible, consequence-free lens of a 21-year-old. He saw an empty house and thought, blank canvas for a party. I saw an empty house and thought, no infrastructure to support human life. "Beer and chips are not a solution, Leo. Where is everyone going to sleep?" "On the floor, in their cars. It's part of the adventure. Look, everyone's happy. You're being a little dramatic, don't you think?" Dramatic. The word hit me like a slap. I had spent 5 years clawing my way back from a divorce that had left me with nothing. 5 years of working 60-hour weeks, of living in a cramped apartment while he was away at school, of dreaming about this one, single, solitary weekend of peace. And I was being dramatic. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, to scream, to cry, to tell them all to get back in their cars and leave, but I was cut off. A pretty girl with wide, anxious eyes, probably the Cassie from the sorority he'd mentioned, was approaching us. She was wringing her hands, her gaze darting between Leo and me. Leo?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Hi, Mrs. H. It's really nice to meet you. Your place is super cute." She gave a weak, apologetic smile. "But, there's a problem with the bathroom." I closed my eyes. Of course there was. The ancient plumbing, the one thing the inspector had warned me might be a little temperamental. Leo rolled his eyes. "What's wrong, Cassie? Clogged already?" Cassie shook her head, her expression growing more panicked. "No, it's not clogged. It won't flush at all. The handle thingy just jiggles. And Kyle didn't know it was broken until after he was done." She swallowed hard, her eyes locking onto mine with an expression of pure dread. "And, he really, really had to go." The words hung in the air, thick and foul, and more potent than the cheap beer being cracked open on my porch. My one bathroom, the tiny temperamental heart of my fragile new home, was already out of commission. And not just out of commission, but defiled. I stared at Cassie, then at Leo, whose face had finally lost its party boy bravado and was now flickering with the first glimmers of panic. "What do you mean, he really had to go?" I asked, my voice flat and devoid of all emotion. It was the only way to keep from screaming. Cassie looked like she was about to be sick. "I mean, it's really bad, Mrs. H." "Like a biohazard situation." I pushed past them without another word, my feet pounding on the old wooden floorboards. The party-goers in the main room parted like the Red Sea as I marched towards the back of the cottage. The music seemed to fade into a dull, distant throb. A small crowd had gathered outside the bathroom door, a mixture of morbid curiosity and genuine desperation on their faces. A lanky guy in a basketball jersey, Kyle, I presumed, stood to the side, looking pale and deeply ashamed. I didn't need to ask. The smell hit me before I even reached the door. It was a violation of the clean pine scent of my new home. I pushed the door open and was greeted by a scene from a frat house nightmare. The tiny room was overwhelmed. The toilet bowl was full, unflushably, horrifically full. The handle was indeed limp and useless, a testament to the cottage's century-old plumbing. And to top it all off, the single roll of toilet paper I had so carefully placed there was gone, likely sacrificed in Kyle's futile, desperate battle. I stood in the doorway for a full 10 seconds, just taking it in. This was it. This was the glorious, legendary weekend my son had planned. I turned around slowly, my eyes scanning the faces of his friends. They weren't bad kids, I knew that. They were just kids, thoughtless, impulsive, and utterly incapable of seeing the world beyond their immediate desires. They saw a toilet. They didn't see the ancient septic system it was connected to, the one the previous owner told me needed to be pumped every other year and handled with extreme care. My gaze landed on Leo. He looked small now, stripped of his earlier confidence. The weight of 21 bladders and the catastrophic failure of my plumbing seemed to be crashing down on him all at once. "Okay," I said, and the room fell silent. My voice was calm, but it was the calm of a dormant volcano. "New rules. Nobody, and I mean nobody, uses that bathroom again." "Understood?" A collective groan went through the crowd. "Where are we supposed to go?" A girl with glitter on her face asked, her voice whining. I pointed out the back door towards the dark woods that bordered the property. "The world is your oyster. Find a tree. Ladies, I suggest you team up." Another wave of groans, mixed with a few nervous giggles. I didn't care. I was in triage mode. I turned back to my son. "Leo, I need a plunger, a bucket, and a very, very large bottle of bleach. I'm assuming you brought none of those things." He shook his head, looking miserable. "No, Mom, I didn't think—" "No, you didn't think," I finished for him. "The nearest hardware store is a 30-minute drive. One way, you're going. Now." "But it's almost dark." "Then I suggest you hurry up," I said, pointing towards the door. "Take Kyle with you. It's the least he can do." As Leo and a deeply mortified Kyle scrambled to find the keys to the Jeep, I faced the remaining horde. "All right, listen up." I clapped my hands, and surprisingly, they all looked at me. "There's no running water until I can figure out this toilet. That means no showers and no washing hands in the sink. I saw a pump for lake water out back. If you need to wash, use that, and the bar of soap I have by the kitchen sink. Don't drink it." The reality of their epic weekend was starting to set in. The girls, in particular, looked horrified at the prospect of no running water. Good. Let them be horrified. Maybe then they'd understand. I spent the next hour in a state of grim determination. I found a stack of old newspapers in a cupboard and laid them out on the floor for people to put their sleeping bags on. I designated one corner of the porch for wet towels and muddy shoes. I took the single bag of trash they had already managed to fill and tied it tightly, placing it by the road. I was no longer the proud new owner of a charming cottage. I was the warden of a pop-up refugee camp. By the time Leo and Kyle returned, the sun had set, and the party had, against all odds, kicked into high gear. Someone had produced a string of battery-powered fairy lights and strung them across the porch. The music was louder, the air thick with the smell of cheap beer and citronella candles. And my son, bless his heart, hadn't just brought back a plunger. He'd brought back two industrial-sized ones, a 5-gallon bucket, a bottle of bleach the size of a toddler, and, as a peace offering, a box of donuts. I left him to face the jeers of his friends and grabbed the supplies. Clad in a pair of yellow rubber gloves I'd found under the sink, I took a deep breath and went to war with the toilet. It was a 30-minute battle, a gruesome, soul-crushing ordeal, but I emerged victorious. With a final gurgling gasp, the toilet flushed. I poured half the bottle of bleach down it for good measure and slammed the door shut, declaring the bathroom officially open for business, but with a strict one-person-at-a-time rule and a list of instructions taped to the door that read like a military manual. Exhausted, I slumped onto a porch step, finally taking a bite of a stale donut. The party swirled around me. For a moment, watching the fireflies begin to blink in the twilight and listening to the distant laughter, I almost felt a flicker of something other than rage. Maybe Leo was right. Maybe it was an adventure. Maybe I was being dramatic. That's when I heard a splash, not a small splash like a fish jumping, a big splash, followed by a loud, triumphant "Whoa!" I stood up, my donut forgotten. Everyone on the porch was rushing towards the edge of the lawn, cheering. I pushed through the crowd and saw it. Out on my small, rickety wooden dock, the one the surveyor had explicitly told me needed to be replaced, was a line of kids. One of them, a big guy with a backwards hat, took a running start. He hit the end of the dock and launched himself into the air, attempting a cannonball. But the old wood, never meant to support the weight of a dozen dancing college students, let alone a running linebacker, didn't hold. With a sickening crack that echoed across the lake, the last 10 feet of my dock splintered, groaned, and collapsed into the dark water, taking the cannonballer and 3 of his friends with it. Panic erupted. The cheering turned to screams as 4 bodies disappeared into the inky blackness of the lake. The music cut out abruptly, leaving only the sound of splintering wood and panicked shouts. For a split second, everyone was frozen, a tableau of horror illuminated by the ridiculously cheerful fairy lights. Then the spell broke. Leo was the first to move, sprinting towards the water's edge, yelling the names of his friends. My own heart hammered in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. My mind, already frayed from the toilet disaster, kicked into an unnerving high-alert calm. This wasn't about property damage anymore. This was about 4 kids in the water, in the dark, in a lake they didn't know. "Get the flashlights from the cars," I bellowed, my voice cutting through the chaos with an authority that surprised even me. "Someone call 911, now!" A few people scrambled to obey, fumbling for their phones. I ran to the edge of the shattered dock, my eyes straining to pierce the darkness. The water was churning where they'd gone in. Then a head broke the surface, sputtering and gasping. It was the cannonballer. I'm okay, he coughed, treading water. Whoa, that was insane. Another head popped up, then a third. It was two of the girls who had been standing at the end. They were clinging to a large piece of floating dock, crying and shivering. I can't find Sarah, one of them shrieked, her voice thin with terror. Sarah! My blood ran cold. One was still missing. Leo was already kicking off his shoes. I'm going in! No! I grabbed his arm, my grip like steel. You have no idea what's under there. Broken boards, nails. You'll get tangled. Beams of light from phone flashlights started to dance across the water's surface, creating confusing, shifting patterns. They weren't powerful enough. We couldn't see anything below the surface. The three in the water were being helped towards the shore by a couple of the stronger swimmers who had waded in. But their attention was divided, their eyes frantically scanning the dark water for their missing friend. Where did she go down? I yelled at the crying girl, who was now being helped onto the grass. Right at the end, where it broke. She just disappeared, she sobbed. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Every ripple on the water looked like a head about to surface. Every shadow played tricks on my eyes. The distant wail of a siren started, a thin thread of sound that seemed impossibly far away. It wouldn't be fast enough. I looked at the wreckage of my dock, the jagged ends of the boards sticking out of the water like broken teeth. Leo was right. She could be trapped. Without another thought, I kicked off my own shoes, my mind racing. The water pump, the old hand pump by the back of the cottage. It was attached to a long, heavy-duty hose for siphoning lake water. Leo, get the pump hose, I shouted, pointing back towards the cottage. The big green one. Bring it here. He looked at me, confused, but the urgency in my voice was enough. He took off at a run. I turned to the stunned crowd. I need the biggest guys you've got, you and you. I pointed at two beefy-looking guys who were standing uselessly by the shore. Get in the water, but stay shallow. We're going to search in a line. Leo came running back, dragging the heavy coiled hose behind him. What are we doing with this? He panted. We're sweeping, I said, grabbing one end. It's heavy. It'll sink. We're going to drag it along the bottom. If she's caught on something, we might feel it. It was a desperate, flimsy plan, but it was better than just staring at the water. I handed one end to the cannonballer, who, to his credit, had sobered up instantly and was now grim-faced and ready to help. I took the other end and waded into the shockingly cold water myself, the muck squishing between my toes. We spread out, forming a human chain, the hose a lifeline between us. Okay, I said, my teeth chattering. Slowly, walk towards the shore, drag it along the bottom. If you feel anything at all, yell. We moved in eerie silence, the only sounds the sloshing of the water and the ragged breathing of the search party. The phone lights on the shore followed our progress. It felt ghoulish, like we were dredging for something we were terrified to find. The hose scraped against rocks and sank into soft mud. My heart leaped into my throat with every snag. We were halfway to the shore when the guy next to me yelped, I've got something. It's heavy. My stomach plummeted. The line stopped. Leo, who was in the middle, swam towards the spot, his face a mask of dread. He ducked under the water. When he came back up, he was gasping, but his eyes were wide with relief. It's a log, he choked out. Just a big, sunken log. A collective sigh went through the group. We started moving again, the fragile hope that had flared up now extinguished. We were almost to the shore, the water only up to our waists, when my end of the hose snagged hard on something. It wasn't the soft resistance of mud or the scraping of a rock. It was a solid, unmoving weight. "Wait," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I've got something here." I pulled, but it wouldn't give. It felt metallic, anchored. I took a deep breath and plunged my head into the frigid water, my hands following the hose down into the murky darkness. My fingers brushed against something cold, hard, and covered in algae. It was a chain, a thick, rusted chain wrapped around what felt like a concrete block. An old mooring, maybe. But as I traced the chain upwards, my hand bumped against something else, something soft. I recoiled instantly, my lungs screaming for air. I shot back up to the surface, sputtering and shivering, my mind refusing to process what I had just felt. The sirens were getting louder now, their red and blue lights flashing through the trees, finally arriving. 2 paramedics were running down the lawn with a stretcher and a medical bag. I pointed a trembling finger at the spot in the water. "There!" I gasped, my voice cracking. "She's there, caught on an old mooring chain." Without hesitation, 2 of the boys dove under. A moment later, they surfaced, struggling to support a limp, pale figure between them. It was Sarah. Her long, dark hair was fanned out in the water around her, her face terrifyingly still. They dragged her to the shore, the paramedics rushing forward, shouting instructions. They laid her on the grass, and as the fairy lights cast a sickeningly festive glow over the scene, I saw it. Her ankle was tangled, impossibly, horribly, in a loop of the rusty chain, and wrapped tightly around her other hand, clutched in a death grip, was a small, waterproof pouch, the kind people use to protect their phones at the beach. The world narrowed to the small, frantically lit circle on my lawn. The paramedics worked with a grim, focused intensity, their voices a low, urgent murmur of medical jargon. No pulse. Starting compressions. Get the defibrillator ready. The party was over. The music was gone, the laughter replaced by hushed sobs and the rhythmic, desperate count of chest compressions. Leo stood beside me, his body rigid, his face ashen. He was watching the life or death struggle for his friend, and I could see the full, crushing weight of his thoughtless invitation settling upon him. This wasn't epic. This was a tragedy of his own making. I felt a strange, detached calm. The adrenaline from the search had given way to a heavy, bone-deep weariness. I watched as they cut away Sarah's shirt, attached the pads to her chest, and delivered a shock that made her body arch unnervingly off the ground. Nothing. They started compressions again. The minutes stretched, each one an agony. The girl who had been crying earlier was now being held by her boyfriend, her face buried in his shoulder, unable to watch. Then a cough. A weak, sputtering, miraculous sound. Sarah's eyes fluttered open. A collective gasp of pure, unadulterated relief swept through the crowd of kids huddled on the lawn. She was alive. They quickly wrapped her in emergency blankets, strapped her to the stretcher, and began the careful journey back up the bumpy road to the ambulance. One of the paramedics paused beside me. "You found her," he said, his eyes tired but kind. "That hose trick, that was smart thinking. You probably saved her life." I just nodded, unable to speak. He glanced at the terrified kids, then back at me. "Her ankle's probably broken. She took in a lot of water, and she's hypothermic, but her vitals are stabilizing. She's a very, very lucky girl." As the ambulance's taillights disappeared into the trees, a heavy silence fell. The party was well and truly dead. No one looked at the coolers of beer. No one suggested turning the music back on. The night was cold now, and the reality of what had just happened, of how close they had all come to witnessing something truly horrific, had sobered everyone more effectively than a pot of coffee ever could. Leo finally turned to me, his eyes filled with a shame so profound it was painful to see. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking, "I am so, so sorry." I didn't answer right away. I looked at the wreckage of my dock, at the trashed interior of my cottage, at the exhausted, frightened faces of his friends. My weekend of peace was a smoldering ruin. But the paramedic's words echoed in my head. "You probably saved her life." "I know you are, sweetie," I said, my voice softer than I expected. I put an arm around his trembling shoulders. The anger was gone, burned away by the terror of the past hour, leaving only a vast, aching exhaustion. In the next hour, a strange and quiet efficiency took over. No one needed to be told what to do. The kids started cleaning up, their movements subdued and methodical. They gathered the empty cans and chip bags, consolidating the trash. They wiped down the counters I hadn't even had a chance to use myself. The boy who had broken the toilet, Kyle, found a broom and meticulously swept the entire cottage floor. The cannonballer, whose name was Mark, organized a team to pull the larger, salvageable pieces of the dock from the shallows and stack them neatly on the shore. They worked in near silence, the spell of their youthful invincibility completely shattered. By dawn, the place was cleaner than when they had arrived. The cars were packed. Cassie, the girl who had first warned me about the bathroom, came up to me, her eyes red-rimmed. "Mrs. H., we're all so sorry for everything. We called Sarah's parents. They said she's going to be okay, and we all pitched in." She pressed a crumpled wad of cash into my hand. It was over $1,000. "For the dock. I know it's not enough, but it's a start." I tried to refuse, but she was insistent. One by one, they came up to me, mumbling their apologies and their thanks before quietly getting into their cars. They were no longer a faceless horde. They were just kids, chastened and humbled. Finally, only Leo was left. He stood in the doorway of the now empty cottage, looking small and lost. "I'll stay and help you fix everything," he said, not meeting my eye. "The dock, whatever you need." I walked over and stood next to him, looking out at the lake. The rising sun was turning the water to a soft, pearly pink. The air was crisp and clean. It was quiet again, the only sound the gentle lapping of the waves. My sanctuary had been violated, but it had also, in a strange way, been consecrated. It was no longer just a place for my own quiet escape. It was the place where a girl's life had been saved, where my son had been forced to grow up in the space of a single night. "No," I said, putting my hand on his arm. "You're going to go back to school. You're going to call Sarah and make sure she has everything she needs. And you're going to think for a very long time about consequences." He nodded, a tear finally tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. "I will. Mom, are you going to sell this place?" I looked at the broken dock, and for the first time, I didn't see destruction. I saw a project. I saw a story. I thought about the first check I would write from the cash in my pocket, not for a new reading chair, but for a pile of fresh lumber. "Not a chance," I said, a small, weary smile touching my lips. "I'm just getting started." He gave me one last tight hug, and then he was gone. I stood on my porch, utterly, blissfully alone once more. The cottage was empty. My cooler held nothing but a melted ice pack. But as I took a deep breath of the morning air, I realized it was the smell of more than just freedom. It was the smell of resilience. It was the smell of a home that had survived its first storm. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, it wouldn't be the last.